Thank you for the introduction, Alessandro, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today for this webinar. I'm going to start with a very quick introduction to let you all know what Lexico is and what we do as a company. And then I'm going to give you a tour of how Lexico works in MateCat, first of all, just to familiarize you with all the different functions we have in MateCat's environment. And then after that, I'm going to give you also a very quick tour of what happens in our own editor, which is separate from MateCat. So let's start with a few things about Lexico first. Basically, we started this about a year and a half ago as a development idea that came after quite a few conversations between the co-founders. And we decided to develop this online solution for quality assurance, specifically linguistic to begin with. And then we started expanding in other areas too. And because it's all API based, it means that it can be integrated with online translation platforms. And that way you can have QA functionality in that kind of environment. But we have also developed our own cloud-based editor where you can do revision for your translation projects with most of the bilingual formats that are supported out there. The way that we have devised the workflow means that it's not intrusive to your translation workflow as it is normally. So if it's properly integrated in your translation environment, then it doesn't get in the way. And it also means that it can be used for a number of different scenarios. So if it's a live translation project, or if you want to clean up a translation memory after you have done your work, it could be used for a number of different things. Now, the things that we do differently compared to other QA tools are more specifically the locale-specific checks that we have developed. So for every target locale that we support, we have checks that follow the rules for conversions and other grammatical issues that might apply to that particular locale, which means that that brings down the number of false positives by a very significant margin. So for the locales we support at the moment, we have a rate of lower than 10%. Because it's all built in your own translation platform when it's integrated, that means that you don't have to go through a learning curve of trying to find out how the tool works and what it does. It's all very intuitive, and because it's all online, it means that there are no issues of compatibility across different systems and different platforms. The reports that are produced are also quite friendly, and they are there just as a point of reference effectively. You don't have to rely on the reports necessarily in order to make your corrections, because when it comes to fixing issues that have been picked up, that have been detected, then you can do that either in the editor or in your own translation tool. The idea behind all this, the central point of it, is that we want to make sure that you save time while doing your revision. And that means that you can then process more of the text that needs to be revised. We have one of the biggest challenges is obviously saving cost, and by saving time, you're effectively doing exactly that. At the same time, you're also improving on the quality of your work overall. Now, where we are at the moment, we have about 25 working locales in production. There are quite a few more that we have in our roadmap for later on. Amongst the various locales that we support, we recently started expanding towards the Asian languages. So we added simplified Chinese recently, and we are aiming to work more with Asian languages in the next few months. There's more than 60 different error classes that we detect for various issues like punctuation or localization conversions or segment checks, for example. And then there are issues that are broader. They're not necessarily linguistic in focus. So obviously we put a lot of emphasis on terminology consistency. You can manage your glossaries in any way you like, at least in our UI. Segment level inconsistencies, spell checking by default, etc. Our integration with MateCat is active by default for the locales we support for them. So that means if you create a project in MateCat and the locales involved are two of the locales that we support, then immediately you can have live QA in MateCat's environment. Apart from MateCat, we also have integrations with another 5 different online tools. And we have also developed an extension for Google Translator Toolkit. Now, after this overview, I think I can switch to our online view. And this is MateCat environment. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. You can see that I've started a project already. This is between American English and European French. So I have a live segment here. This is the first segment in the text that I'm translating. If I type anything in this segment, this is a suggestion from the engine, of course. If I decide to type something in, like this number, for example, then immediately the system reacts and it tells me that something is wrong. This number doesn't feature in the source, so it's telling me that this is a problem. And you can see when you hover your mouse over one of those highlighted areas, immediately you will get information about what the problem is. Now, when I typed this, I also got information about this error here, which was effectively a knock-on effect after I added this number. The additional benefit of having this QA on the fly, effectively while you're translating, means that the review process is not something that happens only after you have done and completed your translation anymore. You're actually getting quality assurance while you're translating. And this is particularly important for issues that have to do with workflow. You don't have to rely exclusively on something that happens after the translation anymore. Now, let's say I disregard this. I'm going to change that and then just confirm this segment and move on to the next one. Now I can see the memory is again providing another suggestion, but now there is an existing problem here. So it tells me what the problem is. I can go in, fix the issue, and then the highlighting will disappear immediately after the problem is fixed. If I'm happy with the rest of the translation, I can just confirm the segment and move on to the next one. And this would be something that comes as a standard feature now for the rest of the document as I go through it. Now, in the process of working through the text with the QA happening at the same time, I'm also getting a counter up here, which basically gives me a number of the errors that have been detected. And I can also have a look at the full report, which operates and counts the errors, and it records all the errors in the background. Now, because I only have a couple of segments that I've worked on so far, it would probably make more sense to show you this report in a completed project. So this is the same text, but I have gone through the whole segments, all the segments, and I have all the errors recorded. So now if I have a look at the QA report, you can access it from here. And now you can see all the problems that have been found. You can see that the errors are all highlighted in different colors, and this color coding is used for us to match it against these filters that you can find up here at the top of the QA report, which basically tells you exactly what kind of problem you're looking at, even without necessarily knowing much more about what the error is specifically. So you have a very quick overview of what's wrong in the text. You can use these filters, in fact, to narrow your attention to one particular area of interest. So if you want, for example, to focus on only those segments that have problems with numbers, you can use the filters to swap and change views. Now I could add, for example, other segments that have problems with symbols, and so on and so forth. So you can use any combination of these filters in any way you like. Now, if you realize that there is a segment here that you know how to fix, and you would like to go back to the document in your MateCat editor to make the correction, you don't have to go back to MateCat's editor straight away. You can just click on the link here, and that will open that particular segment with a problem highlighted again. You can see what the problem is, and just type the correction, and the highlighting will go away. So it's a very smooth process between the report and the editor in that sense. Even if you don't want to go through the document segment by segment to make a correction, you can use the report as a reference point and make all the changes you need. Obviously, when it comes to reviewing the whole document, as you're going through the translation in MateCat, it means you have to go through all the segments one by one because you're effectively translating them right there and then. But at the end of the project, the idea is that all these highlights, this guidance, will tell you where a problem occurs, and you will have completed your translation with a lot fewer errors than what you would have if you had to wait for the end of the project and run the revision, the QA checks only at the end. So this is the idea behind our principle of live QA that we have been able to apply in MateCat's case. The good people of MateCat have helped us over the last few months with the development of this functionality, and now we have this integrated environment that works in tandem between translation and QA. Now, there are other use cases as well. So what I'm going to do now is to take this project link from MateCat, and let's say you have a very large project that has been worked in pieces, and you have a lot of people that have put work into this project, and you want to review other issues that might not be available as functions in MateCat. So as I said before, our focus, especially with our MateCat integration, has to do with the linguistic checks. So as you can see, there are issues with punctuation, numerals, etc. But what I neglected perhaps to mention is that these issues are also checks that you wouldn't normally find in a QA tool. And that's because a lot of the issues that we're covering are locale specific. So a lot of the checks that we provide will give you support in a way that they will not give you an error when there isn't one. Here are a couple of examples to explain this in a bit more detail. So you can see here in this segment we have this date in American English. You can see the order of the numbers in the dates. Now this date in the target has been localized in the long date format in French. However, there is no highlighting here. There's no problem, even though number 04 is missing from the target. Now, if this was a normal consistency check like the ones that you get in most QA tools, this would be marked as an error because of this missing number. However, in our case, because we recognize this is the correctly localized format for this date in the target locale, then we don't mark this as a problem. Same goes in the date below it. You can see again we have the same date in the source, but this date in the target has a different number order, and the punctuation that has been used is also different. Still not marked as an error because this is still a correct format in French. As you can see here, we have other examples: the date, the time format, the international phone code, currency symbols and abbreviations which are matched and mapped to each other, and even number to word conversions. You have this number 12 here, which as a figure doesn't exist at all in the target. However, we do have the word for it in French, which is 12 over here. So if I change this very slightly to type the number for 11, immediately the system will react and it will tell you, you know what, this number 12 doesn't exist in the target, so you need to do something about it. So you know that as you're typing, if you, in a hurry, for example, you were typing your translation and you put in the wrong number, then you can go back to it and fix the problem immediately, and the highlighting will disappear. Now, if we were to take this completed translation now and review it, we could do this as a post-translation revision project in our own Lexico editor. This is the report that we saw earlier. Now I'm going to switch views to go to our own Lexico UI, where you can start the project using the project link from your MateCat translation and just pasting this link here. And now we have all the additional checks that we provide in our own environment. In other words, terminology, where you can add your glossaries and your term bases, depending on what locale pair you're working with. So now we can have also custom checks that you might have created using regular expressions on your own. Lexico has also a default spell checking function which operates on the basis of the handspell dictionaries in your browser. The grammar checks that can also be added are provided as an additional layer of checking with Language Tool, which is a third-party application that we have an integration with. And we also have untranslatables feature, which provides an additional layer for reducing the number of false positives in spell checking. Let me explain very quickly what that means. When you have a text where words from the source appear intact in the target, as in they haven't been translated for whatever reason, then they might not exist in the dictionary of the target language. That means that they will come up as spelling mistakes. However, there might be good reason for those words to appear in the target. There might be a brand name, for example, or it might even be a homograph, a word that looks exactly the same in both the source and the target languages. So by applying this untranslatables check, you're effectively excluding all these words from the spell checking. And that way you have less noise. Now you can use this in automatic mode, or you can use it in manual mode. If there is a particular word that might come up through that operation after the text has been saved. So when I finalize the file that I want to use in my project, now it has the matching locale pair. Now when I use the when I use the manual mode, I will get a list if there were any candidates here that should be excluded from this check. So after I have applied and selected all this, and I also have selected length checks, which can be particularly useful for localization projects where there are space restrictions. So you might have a percentage that you want to apply, or you might want to apply the number of characters. Then I can create my project, and I can run this project now in exactly the same way in Lexico's editor. So now I can review the file here, and as you can see, it's a rather familiar environment. We have source and target segments. We have filters up at the top, again, to change the views in any way you like. But this time now we also have some additional functionality. As you can see, there are filters here that didn't exist before in this MateCat report. So now we do exactly the same thing. If you want to make any changes, for example, I want to make a correction in this segment, I can click on the target segment, I can get more information about what the problem is, and I know how to fix it. So I add the space that is missing. This was a locale specific issue for French punctuation. So I got the information I needed, corrected it, and I saved the segment. Now the moment you saved it, you can see that the segment disappears completely from view, and that's because by default you're only looking at the issues, at the segments that have some kind of an issue. So you don't get to see all of them straight away in order to make the document, let's say, less bulky. But you can bring them all up in view, and now you can see that the segment we edited a little while ago now is marked in green. That tells you basically that you have made a change and that you have saved it as well. You can do the same in the next segment. For example, here we have a space that is not needed, so we can delete this. And now instead of saving it, I'm going to skip it and go somewhere else. If I do this, now this segment is marked in orange, basically telling you you've made a change here, but you haven't saved it. Now, Other features that we have here are the revision history, so all the changes that you make as you go through the process of revising this document, you can go back and make sure you keep track of all the changes you've made. But the more important thing is also to have a look at some of the other functions that don't show up in similar situations in MateCat itself. So we have issues that have to do with terms. So this is a blacklisted word, one of the words that we added through our glossaries earlier. And further down, we might have another example here with a term that doesn't show up in its proper form in the target, so we might have to do something about that. Also, another issue might be an inconsistency with a segment level inconsistency, in other words. So here we have a segment where the source is identical in a different part of the text, but the translation is different. So I can use this pop-up here to jump between segments, and I can see here is my other inconsistent segment, so I need to do something about that in order to make sure that the translation of both segments is consistent. And different types of errors might also be the fact here that we have an empty translation, so this is block highlighted to make sure that you know that something is missing, so you can see it straight away. Then we have another label here about the length that we marked earlier when we were creating our project. So here we know that we have to do something about that if it is an issue that we have to maintain certain length limits. And the same as source label at the bottom tells you that the translation, the target segment is effectively a copy of the source. So maybe somebody forgot to translate it here. So this is what you could do in a post-translation scenario where you want to revise a document in full. This kind of situation means that after you have reviewed your translation, your file, then you mark it as complete. And then when you go back to your project page, you can see that this is marked as completed. In fact, now the easiest thing here would be to push all these updates back straight into MateCat. So you can do all the revisions in the editor here, run all the corrections after you have completed your translation, and when you've done that and you have completed your review, you push everything back into your MateCat project. And that way, when you're back here, all the updates will have taken place. So that's a kind of a different scenario, if you like, for using this kind of link between the two. Now, at this stage, the last thing I would like to show you is what kind of types of errors we detect. So this is a brief overview of the different error classes that I mentioned earlier. So we have punctuation issues. These are the locale specific issues that I mentioned. The conversions between dates, for example, long formats, short formats, symbols and abbreviations, that kind of thing. And then all the other issues that might have to do with consistency checks, both at the unit or word level, but also at the term or the segment level. So there is quite a bit of variety when it comes to the types of errors we detect, and we take pride in the locale-specific check specifically because that brings down the rate of false positives very significantly, and that means you can spend less time trying to find errors that don't really exist. And that means that you can focus your attention at the revision stage after you have done your translation, for example, to really look for things that have to do with the meaning rather than the form. And I think this is my presentation. I hope you have found it useful, and I will look forward to your questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Vassilis. It was very, very interesting. There were actually a few things that I didn't know, so it was refreshing to see them. Thank you very much. So, yeah, some of the participants already asked questions, and you can do that in the Q&A module of the GoToWebinar client. So I have some that have already come in, so we can take maybe 5-10 minutes to answer those.
Of course.
So let's see. The first thing comes from Irina. Now, Irina asks, we have a standalone version of MateCat. Lexica is unavailable in this case. What should we do to turn it on? I tried to explain this a bit more, maybe for the other users as well. So MateCat is available as a cloud platform. You can use it on matecat.com, or you can download the source code and install it on your servers. Of course, this is more for language service providers or larger corporations like the one Irina represents. But anyway, in these cases, so if you're running a private version of MateCat based on the open source software, how do you use Lexica?
Well, Lexica in those cases would have to be connected via an API link, and in those cases, an API key would be provided to the user. Obviously, you will need to buy a license from us, and then depending on what kind of volumes you manage, we will put you on a scale, let's say, and then figure out what the cost would be. And that means that then you have your installation that works, where Lexica applies to your MateCat environment specifically.
Okay, clear. So basically, they need to get in touch with you.
Yes, that's
then
right.
you can provide them with a key, etc. Now,
Yes.
Another question by Martha. Martha asks, with which CAT tools is Lexica integrated with?
Yes, that's a very good question. Let me come back here and show you very quickly. If I were to create a new project, for example, apart from MateCat, we also have an integration with SmartCat, Transifex, MemSource, and Lilt, and also the Google Translator Toolkit extension that I mentioned in the beginning.
Okay, great. And how is it, again, Martha, is the second part of her question is, how is it similar or different, basically, to the one you showed in MateCat?
Yes, the workflow is a little different when it comes to the other tools. So in other words, with MateCat, because of this live integration we have with them, it means that you get QA as you translate. With the other tools, the integration works on a slightly different model. It means that the review can only be done in our environment, but that means at the same time that you don't have to be in, for example, SmartCat's environment. You can get the file directly from your profile, from your account in whichever of these tools you have, and load it up in Lexica as a new project. And then after you have completed all the corrections that you have made here, then again you can push back the updated file straight into your file in the other tool. That means you don't have to be in their environment at all. You can just work in Lexico to do that.
Okay. And another question here comes from Mai. I think I pronounced it correctly. Anyway, Mai asks, does Lexica support Arabic? And I would try to expand that question, meaning what locales does Lexica support? So is Arabic one of them, and what others do you support?
So the locales that we support on the whole right now are the following. Let me show them here on my screen. It's going to be easier for you to have a reference point. So you can see them down here. Arabic at the moment is one of the locales that we are working on. Specifically, we are at an advanced alpha version, let's say, at the moment, which means that we hope in the next few weeks that Arabic might be fully supported and in production. As I mentioned earlier, we recently added simplified Chinese, so we're looking towards the east at the moment to try to include as many of those locales as possible in the near future. The way that we work when we add new locales is that we rely on language and translation experts in that particular locale. and they help us develop the linguistic rules that will apply, especially for the locale-specific checks. So depending on how exotic a locale might be, it might take less or more time to develop, let's say. But then, you know, taking into account periods of testing, etc., we need to make sure that everything works properly before it's released in production.
Okay, great. This question about locales is very interesting because there is another one here asking us about the differences among Lexica, Verifica, Xbench. Actually, these three tools are the ones that are mentioned. And my question is, okay, what kind of differences are there, and why are you focusing on specific locales?
Right. Let's say our mentality and our philosophy about the checks that we provide is very different compared to the other two tools that you mentioned, Alessandro. So specifically for Verifica, we know that they provide the environment to develop checks that apply to specific locales, but all those checks have to effectively be created and configured by the user. So by default, those checks do not exist, as far as we know. The user, if they want to develop something that applies for a specific locale pair, and it has to do with localization conversions about symbols or currencies or dates in various formats, then these have to be configured and created by the user in that environment. Our approach is slightly different. We want to take that hassle completely out of the hands of the reviewer or the translator. We create and apply these rules by default. And then if somebody needs to have something more refined because of client requirements or because of a specific style guide that they have to follow, then what we recommend is that they can create their own custom checks and they can apply them to their workflow. But by applying locale-specific checks, you save a ton of time that you have to spend going through a QA report that gives you so many false positives, which are generated exactly because locale-specific checks don't exist in that tool. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I was muted, so my feedback was a bit delayed. But anyway, yeah, thank you. And I know we're running out of time, but maybe we can take some more minutes to a couple more questions, if that's okay with you, Vassilis.
Of course, absolutely.
So Ail asks, how many languages does Lexica and MateCat cover? I suppose they won't cover dialects, right? So you showed us the list of locales by Lexica. Do they overlap with the ones in MateCat, or what are the differences?
There is an overlap, of course. The range of locales that we support in MateCat at the moment is slightly different. I can show you from MateCat's environment here. So if I go to the home page and under advanced options, you can see that the range of locales right now in MateCat is slightly smaller, but I can tell you that all the locales that you're looking at here are also supported in our editor. It's just that in our editor at the moment we have a new release that we applied recently, which includes another 7 or 8 locales, which have not been released into MateCat yet.
But you will give those to us, right?
Well, of course.
Okay. So Marta again asks, what about confidentiality of the files you manage with Lexica? This is something we get all the time with cloud-based tools, and probably we have the same questions. But what can you tell us?
Well, it would be very useful here to show you on our website a section that you can use also as a reference point with regards to security and confidentiality. We use Amazon servers to provide our cloud service, and all kinds of security updates that have to do with those servers are applied. And also important to note that all the traffic that goes in and out of our service is always HTTPS, which means that let's say the security measures that are applied are the ones that you would find for any cloud service out there. So as far as we're concerned, that is one of our priorities, and we always apply the toughest measures that apply at the time.
Okay. Probably the last question we can take, depending on the time it takes to answer, is
Okay.
Is there any batch operations? This is by Alexander. So is there any batch operations that you can perform in Lexica?
I will presume that this means when creating a new project, what you can...
Actually, Vassilis, he says, can I change equal errors altogether? So I guess the same error repeated throughout.
I see, yes. Let me show you an example. So here, if I'm back in the editor here, and I have a case of an error that looks something like this, like multiple spaces, then as you can see, you have the option to either ignore all issues that have exactly the same nature. So all issues in other parts of the document that look exactly the same, so multiple spaces. You have the choice either to ignore them all, if you consider them to be a false positive, or you can fix them all, in which case you define how you want to fix that particular error, and then the same fix will apply to all instances of the same error in this document. And that's kind of an autocorrection, if you like, but it's something that the user defines. So basically you choose whether you want to fix them in a specific way or you want to ignore them.
Okay, great. I guess that answers Alexander's question. I believe we ran out of time, really. I mean, we took more time than expected, but this was good. There were a lot of questions coming in. We weren't able to answer all of them, but probably we can do that via email, Vassilis, if that's something you would like to do. So what I would suggest is we will get back to all of the participants today via email and send you all the replies to these questions. And of course, if you have any other doubts, maybe you can go to lexica.net and look through the documentation. And anyway, we will provide also a contact, so a point of contact if you need any, but there's also the contact link in the Lexica website. And yeah, I guess that's it for today. Vassilis, is there anything else you would like to add?
That was all. I want to thank everyone for attending. And if you do have any other questions, please do get in touch with us. We'll be happy to hear from you.
Okay then. Thank you again, Vassilis, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar. When I close the session, you will be prompted to provide us feedback on the webinar. And of course, we would love to hear from you. Thank you, and till the next time. Bye.
Thank you from me as well. Goodbye.